Hi, everyone. We've got a question from Keith, a fellow boater, asking some questions about or the implications of having a lithium battery and how do you wire, where should your alternator be connected when you have a lithium battery? So, Keith's question says, Jeff, I watch your video charging lithium batteries on my boat with an alternator. Why wouldn't you wire the alternator directly to the house battery, which is lithium, and then install a DC to DC charging converter from the house lithium battery to the starter battery? Okay. Well, that's certainly the way that we would have done it if it wasn't a lithium. So, for example, on my boat, and we've done this on many boats, not all boats are the same, but, for example, on my boat, I have the alternator. Obviously, it does have a switch, so I can isolate the alternator, but the alternator is directly connected to my house battery via a switch and via a fuse. So I have two ways of disconnecting, and I have circuit protection. And yeah, that makes sense. And I have, but remember, in this setup, a lead acid battery. In my case, it's an AGM. What you have is the alternator will never suddenly, or how about this? Let me rephrase. The battery will never disappear on the alternator. The battery's really always going to be there. A bad battery is still a battery. It doesn't really behave all that well, but it's still there. It doesn't disappear. The challenge with a lithium battery is it has intelligence. It's not just a battery, it's lithium with a computer on top. That computer is a BMS, and that BMS can make decisions, and it needs to be there to protect the battery. That's why there's a computer on top. And suddenly it could happen that your battery, after the alternator has been running for a period of time, the battery says, you know what? I've had enough. I am disconnecting myself from that alternator. And remember, the alternator is not talking to the battery. They're not exchanging information. They're not talking. They're not making sure each one is right. There's no communication, right? They're just sort of doing their thing and they're hoping the other one is going to be fine with it, but there's no talking. So if your lithium battery suddenly disconnects itself and the only thing connected to it is the alternator, as we know, and some of us remember, and I learned the hard way at the beginning when I owned my boat. If you ever disconnect an alternator from a battery bank while the engine is running and the alternator is outputting, so if you ever go to your battery switch, and you can't do this, and you turn the battery switch to off, and it actually says on most battery switches, never turn battery switch to off when engine is running. There's a little disclaimer at the bottom of the switch. If you do that, you most likely will lose your alternator. Not lose like physically disappear, but your alternator is just going to become damaged. And because you can't have an alternator lose a connection to a battery. So the reason why we install these battery isolators on the output of an alternator when we have a lithium is so that there's always a place for the alternator to still dump current to, even though it would suddenly lose the lithium battery because the BMS deemed that it needed to protect the battery. And so that's the reason why with a lithium battery system, we often install battery isolators, the FET type, the modern type, as a way to protect the alternator in the event, and it's rare, that the lithium battery would disconnect itself from the circuit. Um, and now there are lithium batteries, of course, that have charging ports, charging circuits versus load circuits. And so that's another thing you can do. It gets more complicated, but still doable. But for the most part, for the drop-in lithiums, then we'll end up putting a battery isolator to make sure that we never lose a connection between a battery and an alternator, even though the lithium battery disconnects itself. So great question, Keith. And that's the why. Thanks for watching. Share with us how you do lithium on your boat. Where were the pitfalls and issues that you were worried about? And how did you solve it? Thanks for watching again. So if you're curious again, go on our website and find out more answers and solutions with this sort of setup. And thanks for asking. And thanks for all of you for listening and tuning in.